because it turned out that this area in Platia Kacandes was right at the borderline between where the communists were fighting the nationalist forces in December of 1944. Some of you will know that the Germans pulled out in October, and immediately the government in exile came in with the blessings of the British, and peace lasted for a couple of months. And then the communist groups felt that they were not well enough represented, and they wanted to stage a protest in Syntagma Square. And by accident, some police fired on the protesters, and that unleashed a very vicious battle for control over Athens that really went street by street, block by block, between communist forces and the national forces who were being supported by the British. So my dad and these other two boys were right on the borderline between those fights. One day the communists would show up, one day the British would show up, one day the Greek nationalists would show up. They didn't know what to do. In any case, on a particular day, they saw that the communists had hidden Molotov cocktails in a theater that was located directly opposite the place they were sleeping. And my dad told the British about this, and they rolled in a tank and they blew up the theater. Well, between the tank blast and the Molotov cocktails that were in the theater, it not only destroyed the entire theater, but the fire swept to the other side, to the building that the boys were in. So they raced out the back of the building, and the two brothers went to one side, and my father went to the other, and was essentially adopted by the British, into whose arms he had fled. So this is a tank of the 50th Royal Tank Regiment of the British 8th Army. This was the same outfit that had fought at El Alamein. They had fought in Sicily, and then they were sent to Athens to fight the communists. So this is my dad now with them in Patras. Next image. Here you see some of the members of the 50th Royal Tank Regiment with my dad, also still in Patras. So this is now February 1945. These are some documents that I actually was able to find related to this period in my dad's life. This is a pass written in pencil, signed by a sergeant of that 50th Royal Tank Regiment, giving my father permission to pass through the streets. This, just written about a month later, was given as a kind of recommendation for him so that he could find employment with the British in this period, which he did. He worked as a valet to British officers, and he also worked as an elevator operator in British headquarters until they were able to get a new passport. Next slide. Here's my dad working and going to one of his jobs in Athens after the hostilities had ceased. Next slide. And in that period, his family was reunited by correspondence. The children in Greece applied for an American passport to get back to the United States. This was the picture that was taken. And I think, for me, it's very poignant looking into those children's faces. You get some kind of sense of what they've just been through in the previous 8 years. Next slide. They did get that passport to get out. My grandmother still had an American passport, a Greek passport, excuse me, had to get it renewed, and they were able to come to the United States in October of 1945. So they had left in August of 37, they returned in October of 45, and all that period they had not seen their father. So here's one more story. This book is filled with stories. The story goes that when they got to the United States, my grandfather moved them to a house he had bought for his wife in Neptune, New Jersey. And the children were very, very struck with all the green grass. And they couldn't believe that people would cut the grass and just throw it away, because every animal they knew who liked grass was starving in Greece. So they collected the grass and put it in potato sacks they had gotten from the local diner. My father has a long history with diners that started then. And they took these sacks filled with grass to the post office, and they said they wanted to send it to the sheep in their village in Greece. Well, the guy at the post office had never heard such a story before, and he called his friend at the newspaper, and the journalist came and interviewed my father. So an article was published about my father in October 1945 and what he had just been through. And a wealthy woman in the area read the article, called my grandfather and said, If you want him to get a good Christian education, I'll send him to school. So my dad, after having been separated from his own father for 8 years, was just a few weeks later sent off yet again to private school. That did allow him to get a good education, and he eventually went to Cornell University. Okay, so we're going to make a little bit of a transition here and tell you how I began to find out how I was related to Stockton, California. I'm sure you're asking yourself, what could possibly be the connection to Stockton here? When my grandfather Kacandes died, which he did very suddenly of a heart attack at age 65 in 1970, my father suffered very, very badly because he had never made up with his own dad. He always resented, he thought his father had just left them in Greece and forgot that he had a family and had really abandoned them. And they were never able to really talk about that together. So he went through a lot of emotional duress, and this emotional duress was heightened by the fact that he found letters proving that his father had tried to find the family. And I reproduced those letters in the back of this book so that it was a very poignant piece of it. But while he was trying to arrange his own father's paper, he found this book. And I hope you can see it. It's written in Greek, and it's advice for immigrants who have come to America. So it's a very interesting piece that all these immigrants, including many of your ancestors, came to this country and they wanted to learn how to get along. What should they do? So this book had all kinds of advice for them in Greek, which also shows how literate they were. The problem for me was that it was signed by someone named James F. Kacandes. And as you know, Greek families like to recycle their names. We're not very creative. We named the next generation after the previous one. And there were no James or Dimitrios in our family. And everyone looked at each other and they said, who could be James Kacandes? Well, I'm going to just, unfortunately, I couldn't find the electronic copy I have of this, so I'll show you the hard copy. That's the inside, then, of the book. And James Kacandes gives some information about himself, and he says, December 12th, 18th, 1918, James F. Kacandes, number 437, and then Gail was really a genius with this, because it said Sumakin Street, S-U-M-A-K-I-N, Stockton, California. And I thought, that's an unusual name for a street. Well, with Gail's help, and with the help of another book, that my aunt then found. So this, you can see how beautiful this is. This book is filled with letters in Greek, translated into English to conduct business. So how do you conduct business in the United States? It gave them a formula in English, also signed by James, only his English had gotten a little bit better. This was 1919, so now it says James Kacandes, P.O. Box 55, Stockton, California, 437, Miss King, San Joaquin. So that was the name of the street, it turns out. So the poor guy couldn't, he spelled it phonetically as well as he could that first time. He got it right the second time. So I want to show you a little more about my journey with James Kacandes. Next slide, please. This is the census from 1910. I was able to find out with Gail and other people's wonderful help that this man had come to the United States in 1906 to the New York area with his younger brother Eustathius. And both of them are documented in this census found in all places of St. Louis, another town I thought I had absolutely no connection to. Next slide. This was a registration card for the draft. All men had to be registered for the draft, and you can see here this is also signed in Stockton in 1918. This is the actual registration card then that James Kacandes received, and you can see also that he's in Stockton. This information was very mysterious to me, that he identifies a woman as Panaya Kacandes in Galaxia, Greece. Many of you know there's a town named Galaxidi, which is near to this. I don't know why he put that information. He was from the same village that I showed you before. His father would have been from Zorianos, and he himself was probably born in Kolopetica. But this gave me more proof that I was on to the right family. Next slide.